Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Moscow. We have interesting statement and very interesting update. Moscow unimpressed by Trump's ultimatum, the New York Times. The Kremlin remains completely calm amid Trump's loud statements and his ultimatum to end the conflict in Ukraine. Russian officials and media show no slightest sign of concern. On the contrary, they emphasize confidence in the economy's resilience and readiness to continue, fulfilling military objectives regardless of external pressure. Putin sees himself as a winner and sees no reason to stop without serious concessions from Ukraine. The Russian president himself has not yet publicly commented on Trump's initiative, but as New York Times notes, Moscow's position remains unchanged. No threats or tariffs scare Russia, and the course toward achieving the goals of the special military operation is unwavering. So these are the statement about Russia. Another important article today, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that during the previous night, Ukraine attacked the territory of Russia with 122 drones. So once again, I would like to remind you that the last time the Ukrainians attacked Russia took place in May, and it seems that Ukrainians are trying to secure the sky before they use their long-range missiles that were produced by, let's say, with money of the Western countries. I would like to remind you that during the previous days we got lots of reports that the Western countries, including the United States of America and Germany, would provide or would pay money for missiles that Ukraine will be able to use to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. Now, it's important to follow the situation, and it is important to understand what is going to happen this upcoming night, because if Ukrainians continue their pressure with this number of drones, this will mean just one thing: Ukrainians are preparing to attack the city of Moscow in coming days. Now let's talk about Kiev. Very interesting statements we got today as well. The military will return home when we defeat the Russian armed forces. That was stated by Zelenskyy in the parliament. So as you can see today, Zelenskyy stated that he is not going to continue negotiation process. He is not going to make any compromises with the Russian position about the peaceful settlement of the conflict. Zelenskyy is going to defeat the Russian Federation, and only then he is planning to return back forces to their homes. So this is the situation. Furthermore, today we got report that Zelenskyy in the parliament announced that he submitted a document to the Rada appointing former Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal as the new Minister of Defense of Ukraine. The former Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Umerov, was, according to information, is going to be sent as the ambassador to the United States of America. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground. We have interesting changes, and first let's talk about the Sumi direction. The Ukrainians continue their offensive operation in the area of the village by the name of Kondratovka. Currently there are very heavy clashes. The Ukrainians continue sending their forces in the northern part of the settlement, trying to force the Russians to fall back from the southern and the southeastern part, but the main problem for the Ukrainians is that they suffer huge losses, because every building that Ukrainians take under their control, every additional square kilometer that Ukrainians regain in this battle, the Russians then bomb and attack with everything they have. In this video we can see how Russians were attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine with FABs. Basically, Ukrainians suffer huge losses just in one battle for this small village. It's very difficult to imagine what kind of losses the Ukrainians can suffer if they decide to launch another adventure or another offensive operation, let's say somewhere in the Belgorod direction, or let's say in the Bryansk direction, or so on. At the same time, we got very interesting update from the settlement of Yunakievka. The battle for this territory started probably 2 or something like this months ago, and yet the Russians haven't managed to establish complete control over this territory, but it seems that the battle for this territory is coming to an end. Today, several neutral mappers made their own statements about the situation on the ground, and according to them, by the morning of the 17th of July of 2025, the Russians secured around 70% of the locality city, and the Russians continue their offensive. If this information is correct, then most likely we should expect by the end of this week that the Russians will take this village under complete control. Now let's move to the northeastern part of the Kharkiv Oblast. This morning we got a lot of very interesting updates from this area. And first let's continue with the city of Volchansk. I would like to remind you that yesterday we got a very important video that was published by Ukrainians from the 57th Brigade. And in this video we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians in different parts of the settlement of Volchansk, mainly in the western part of the settlement. A lot of episodes, a lot of videos, and 3 of them were geolocated. And according to this video, yesterday we adjusted the map in the western part, and the most important, the Russians secured the industrial zone in the western part of the city. And today we got additional changes on the ground that this time were provided by pro-Ukrainian resources. And according to them, the Russians also managed to improve their positions in the northern part of the forest that is located to the west of the city of Volchansk. Currently, there are very heavy clashes and the Russians continue offensive. Most likely, currently the clashes are taking place for this part of the forest. This is very important achievement of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and now it's become clear that the Russians are going to take Volchansk in coming months or days, and this is a primary target for the Russians. At the same time, today, a group of forces north, more precisely their official Telegram channel, this morning stated that the northern forces managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Degtyarne. And based on this report, we have adjusted this map. Most likely today, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this information, and most likely today we're going to receive another video with the Russian flag. So based on this report, once again we adjusted the map and the Russians continue their offensive. Now, when summarizing everything about the northeastern part of the Kharkiv Oblast, we see that the Russians are advancing and trying to improve their positions in the area of the city of Volchansk. The Russians are attacking along the river of Volchi in the area of the settlement of Degtyarne. The Russians are trying to improve their positions in the vicinity of the settlement of Milovoy, and of course the Russians continue their offensive from the river of Oskol in the northwestern direction. So it's become clear that the Russians are tasked to establish complete control over this territory and to get first of all Pechenegi Reservoir and then to outflank the city of Kupiansk from the west and from the northwest. So very important offensive from the Russian side. We see that the Russians are focused, and we see that Ukrainians are not showing significant resistance. Now let's move further. As for the line between the southern Kupiansk direction and the city of Siversk, the situation remains tense. We have some changes on the ground, but they're small. The Russians managed to improve their positions, but it seems that the Russians are not advancing very fast. They are moving, but very slowly. Now let's talk about the situation around the city of Pokrovsk and the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration. The situation for the Ukrainians here is very difficult. Let's discuss the article that was published by the soldier of the armed forces of Ukraine who is currently located in this area. In the Mirnograd direction, the Russian armed forces are approaching Rodinskaya. Everything happened too quickly, and now the Russian armed forces are actually on the outskirts of the city. Now this is already creating huge problems for defense of the entire Pokrovsk-Mirnograd agglomeration. And if we take into account that the Russian armed forces are already on the outskirts of Novoekonomichny, then the situation can be described as critical. So the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians are trying to attack this mine and that there are very heavy clashes for this territory. During the previous night, several sources published different maps where we can see how exactly the battle for this mine is taking place. So this is the first map that was published by different assigned resources. Rodinskaya sector further info from the field. Fighting continues for the approaches to the Krasnolimanskaya mine. The Russians are trying to reach it and the Ukrainians are trying to deny it to them. So as you can see, according to this map, the Russians during the previous 2 days already made several attempts to attack this mine and to dig in deeper on the eastern outskirts. But as for the beginning of the 17th of July, the Ukrainians managed to repel every single attack that was carried out by the Russians. It doesn't mean that the Ukrainians are able to do this endlessly, obviously the Russians sooner or later will be able to break through Ukrainian defense and to establish complete control over this territory. If the Russians capture the mine of Krasnolimansk, this is going to be the beginning of the end for Ukrainians. At the same time, the Ukrainians continue improving their positions along the main supply line that goes through the village of Rodinska. In these pictures, we can see lots of pictures how Ukrainians establish protection nets around this supply line, and this protection net was pretty damaged during the clashes that have been taking place since the beginning of the battle for the northern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. As we discussed in the previous videos, the Russians also intensify their pressure from the southwestern part, and the Ukrainians are saying that now they are forced to move and to switch their, let's say, defense positions from the southwest to the southeast, and the Ukrainians are saying that this situation pretty exhausts them. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions. As for several pro-Russian resources, currently the clashes are taking place for the settlement of Lyantovichi. So it seems that the Russians will be able to secure the village, the city of Pokrovsk and the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration within the next 50 days, or to create a critical situation for the Ukrainians. Also, after not very long operational pause, the Russians resumed their offensive operation in the Dnipropetrovsk direction. During the previous 12 hours, this information was confirmed by several pro-Russian resources. According to them, now the Russians are trying to get the settlement of Novopavlivka from the south and from the southeast. The Russians are trying to get as close as possible with the purpose to establish fire control, to collapse, to defeat and to destroy these pockets that still remains under complete Ukrainian control, and to shorten the distance to Novopavlivka itself. At the same time, several pro-Ukrainian resources reported that the Russians continue their offensive in the western direction. There are just 4 settlements left in front of the Russians. We are talking about Alexandergrad, Andreevka, Klivtsova, Zelený Gai, and the settlement of Grushevsk. Furthermore, the Russians began bombing and attacking first settlements on the territory of the Nipro region in this area. For example, in this video we can see how Russians attacked a settlement of Yanvarskaya, which means that the Russians, after they secured the village of Voskresenka, are going to enter the Dnipro region and to continue offensive operation already on the Dnipro direction, which is critical situation for Ukrainians, because Ukrainians and Zelenskyy is not ready for this offensive. And during the previous night, the Russians carry out another massive missile and drone strike, and this time the Russians attack a city of Nipro. Very important attack, because several pro-Ukrainian resources reported that the Russians are about to begin another wave of the Zaporozhye direction of the Zaporozhye offensive, with the purpose to get as close as possible to the river of Dnipro, the cities of Zaporozhye. So that is why most likely the Russians during the previous night were attacking warehouses, ammo depots and fuel depots on the territory of Nipro, which Ukrainians were planning to use to send to the line of combat contact, but most likely now they have nothing to send. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.